Now, Washington and Moscow appear to be getting closer on the back of their Ukraine war peacemaking negotiations. Will their renewed ties mean the end of the war? Let's turn to Professor Mason Richey. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great, thank you for having me.
So how did the U.S. and Russia agree to normalize their ties all of a sudden, or is this not an all of a sudden development?
I don't think it's all of a sudden by any means, although I'm a bit surprised perhaps at how far things have gone so quickly. Not so much perhaps because of Trump, but rather some of the people around him who I thought would perhaps be at least a bit more of a break on Trump's efforts to reset relations with Russia. Trump has shown a long time streak of respect for Vladimir Putin as strong. We've known that for years and years. So I think he was predisposed to wanting to try to reset relations in this way. Obviously, Trump wants to solve the Ukraine-Russia war in a way that he thinks benefits himself politically and personally. It also cashes in on his campaign promise to end the war. That also allows his administration to turn, to other things that they would like to do internationally. And obviously, you can't solve the war in Ukraine without going through Russia. So I think all of those things sort of play into each other and help explain how it is that we've arrived where we're at.
Well, Russian President Vladimir Putin appears to be quite satisfied with the latest peace talks between Washington and Moscow. Now, what do you think that satisfied him about the negotiations this week? Trump pleasing Putin? What's your take on it?
My goodness, why would he not be satisfied? Putin's gotten pretty much everything he wanted and more.
Yeah.
What seems to be on the table, what we've heard right now, is that the United States isn't going to put troops on the ground, isn't going to provide much, if anything, in the way of security guarantees. Rather, it's going to be Europe that's going to be responsible for that. The United States is not apparently willing under Trump to open up a pathway for NATO membership. There are even rumors that the Trump administration has threatened to pull out some troops that it's added under the Biden administration on NATO's eastern flank. So those are all things that Putin wants, obviously, some things he probably didn't even think that he could get from the Trump administration. In addition to that, rhetorically, we've seen Trump spout the Russia line that Zelensky's a dictator, that Ukraine started the war, these obvious falsehoods. Not agreeing to include in the G7 statement that Russia was the aggressor in the war. That's a diplomatic victory for Russia and a diplomatic loss for Ukraine and Europe, and frankly also for the reputation of the United States. And it looks like, in addition to all of that, NATO is fracturing. So this is the best day that Putin is, or the best week that Putin has had in years and years. Why would he not be happy?
Well, that's probably why they decided to, Trump and Putin decided to leave Ukraine and EU out of the talks, right?
Yeah, so there's a number of reasons why Ukraine has been perhaps left out of the talks. Frankly, part of the story is I think Trump has a personal dislike of Zelensky because ultimately his first impeachment was traced back to events in Ukraine and the way that Zelensky's government pushed back against some of the things that Trump wanted involving Hunter Biden and the Biden family. So there's a personal dimension of that. In addition to that, I think, as I said, Trump has a sort of unhealthy respect for Putin as a strong man, and he sees Zelensky as weak. I think he's got people in his ears, such as Tucker Carlson and others in his administration, who are Russia friendly for reasons that escape me. And in addition to that, ultimately having more people at the table makes it harder, right? So if you're going to have Ukraine at the table, if you're going to have Europe at the table, unless they can provide an excellent reason for why they have leverage that should make them be at the table, large powers are going to go over the head of the weak. The strong do what they can, the weak suffer what they must. And that, I think, is part of the equation for why we don't see yet, at least, Europe and Ukraine getting sufficient input into this quote-unquote peace process.
Well, Trump is now calling Zelensky a dictator. Now, you just mentioned their friendship is not the prettiest. What else is on Trump's mind?
What else is, well, I mean, obviously what's on Trump's mind, I think, in the first place is whatever he can get out of it personally. I think he wants to be rewarded with a Nobel Peace Prize.
Right.
I think he wants to feel like he's a big man who's the equal and strong man bona fides along with Putin and Xi Jinping. I think he does, and people in his administration do think that once they quote unquote solve this problem with the Russia-Ukraine war, that they'll be able to turn to other global issues. And including increasingly, I think, to East Asia, which has so far not really suffered very much from the Trump chaos and the Trump tornado. And I think somewhere in the back of his head and people around him, I think that there's an element of the Trump administration that is looking at some type of an attempt, at least, at some type of 19th century sphere of influence sort of relationship where the United States would end up with the Western Hemisphere, and Russia would have a sphere of influence in Europe, and then China would have its sphere of influence in Asia. So, I think that there's an attempt at a grand bargain that's perhaps coming around the corner at some point after this war is over as well.
Well, Trump has also, hinted hope of meeting Putin within February. If that does happen, that should be next week. If they do end up meeting next week, does that mean the end of the Ukraine war will come sooner than we expect?
That's hard to say. And it's also hard to say if they're going to get this meeting in by next week. The Kremlin spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, said the meeting may happen or this month, or it may not happen this month. But at some point, presumably, it will happen. It might be next week. It might be afterwards. I think there's quite a bit of work that probably needs to be done to prepare that, and whether or not the U.S. and Russia are capable of getting that done within the next few days in order to make it happen before the end of the month is a separate question. Presumably once a Putin-Trump meeting would take place, the things would accelerate in terms of trying to bring the war to a close. But in some ways, the war isn't over until Ukraine says it's over. Ukraine can keep fighting regardless of what the U.S. and Russia work out up until a certain point. Eventually they run out of troops, they run out of materiel, and unless the European Union can backfill the materiel that Ukraine would need, and unless Ukraine can find a way to conscript more people into their military, at some point, sooner rather than later, probably Ukraine runs out of the capacity to fight.
Definitely. All right, Professor Richey, thank you so much for connecting with us this morning. We appreciate it.
Great. Thank you for having me.